Hey, welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Thanks for joining us today. Joined by Jordan Phelps, our White House reporter. A lot of news to get to on this very frigid Wednesday. It is cold. It's cold out there. It's cold in the nation's capital, but the wheels are turning up on Capitol Hill for those negotiations to avoid another government shutdown. The clock is ticking. I think just about a dozen days or so. The lawmakers have to work out some sort of deal, then get it to President Trump. Our John Parkinson is up on Capitol Hill tracking the developments today. John, bring us inside today's first big meeting. This is the first time that a bipartisan group of lawmakers is going to go into a room, close the door, and hopefully come out with some sort of a plan on border security. What's the sense up there? Do you think they're actually going to be able to work something out amongst themselves?
Well, Devin, that's the question that's on everybody's mind right now. I think you look, and it is a bipartisan, bicameral conference committee, which means that there's Senate Republicans and Democrats and House Republicans and Democrats, and all of them have to come together in order to get this agreement. You need a majority of senators to separately sign on, and also a majority of House members to sign on in order for any sort of a deal to be considered by the full House and Senate. And even if we do get to that stage, if, say, this conference committee comes up with a narrow scope deal on border security, it's still unclear whether that's going to come to the floor in the House of Representatives, whether Speaker Pelosi would allow a vote that perhaps had border wall funding if that's what they come up with, or whether a vote would even be allowed in the Senate if it didn't have border wall funding. So you saw the president today, he said that it'd be a waste of time if the conferees were not discussing border wall money. And so far during today's opening statements, we saw a couple of comments, talk about how they need to deliver results for border security, and that a wall, in the eyes of Republicans, is part of that solution. And Democrats and Republicans are both agreeing also on several other steps for border security that they could take.
There's a lot of optimism on both sides, though. These appropriators, we heard from them yesterday here in the briefing room, but everybody's talking about what President Trump will do at the end of the day here. John's talking about what the House and the Senate will do, but ultimately this will come down to President Trump, and Alex Malin is over at the White House now. He's been tracking the president's reaction to the kickoff of these negotiations and sort of the markers that he's putting down as these talks get underway. Alex, at one point the president said he's willing to accept a wall, or whatever you want to call it. He also signaled that perhaps he doesn't have very much optimism that they'll come up with something he'll like. But what's he saying today so far about the negotiations that are getting underway?
Well, the only thing that we've heard from the president today is a tweet this morning where he said, if the committee of Republicans and Democrats now meeting on border security is not discussing or contemplating a wall or physical barrier, they are wasting their time. So that's really the voice that we've heard from this White House, that as long as these meetings are going on, they have to include some type of discussion of building a wall or physical barrier, be it the steel slats that the president has repeatedly talked about. But really, it's a wait and see here, because we haven't heard from the president since Friday in the Rose Garden. He's been, basically huddled with aides, we're told, in the Oval Office, really not making any type of public appearances this week, and saving really all the public reaction or appearances for his Twitter feed.
Yeah, he's certainly been out of the public eye, but John Parkinson, as those negotiators get underway, it does seem that the potential for a solution, if there is one here, could potentially come down to terminology, right? Whether they can both sides can effectively claim victory in the wording that's in this agreement having to do with border security. Maybe they call it a fence, a wall, slats, a barrier, something that they both can agree to, right?
Yeah, we saw Minority Leader here in the House, Kevin McCarthy, yesterday. He was asked, does the conference report need to include the word wall? And he kind of laughed. He said, no, you could call it a barrier if that's what you want. But Republicans are making clear that they want some sort of money for a physical barrier, a physical fence, a physical wall, something to impede immigrants from coming across the southern border there. Richard Shelby, the top Republican in the Senate Appropriations Committee, he also said something similar, that last year when the Appropriations Committee voted on its DHS appropriations bill, it voted like 25-6 to approve that bill, and that included money for new barrier walls too. So he's saying, what's changed really over the last year? Well, what has changed is Democrats have dug in deep against any wall funding. They took the House majority last fall. So I think the dynamics are changing here on Capitol Hill, and we have divided Congress. So it's just a whole new dynamic to address here in the 116th Congress.
And Devin, it's hard to see the president coming out victorious through these negotiations because, after all, Democrats went in emboldened. It's the president who caved to get to this point. And over at the White House, Devin, it seems almost an inevitability that the president is preparing to declare a national emergency. The president, of course, has also talked about the fact that he could shut down the government again, which he could. But the sources I talked to seem to indicate that what's really realistic at this point is that national emergency option if these negotiations don't go as planned.
Yeah, that sure does seem like it's coming. We've been hearing from both sides that that's a likelihood. John Parkinson, thanks so much for your reporting there. Meanwhile, speaking of immigration, a couple of big headlines in the past couple of days have hit President Trump regarding immigrants that work for him, undocumented immigrants, that is. The Washington Post exposing both back in December and again just 2 days ago that President Trump has employed dozens of undocumented workers at his golf clubs and properties around the country, and because of their reports, has recently done a purge of those workers and implemented some tougher restrictions around hiring there, even though the president promised during the campaign that he had already had those restrictions in place. Let's bring him in, Alex Mallon, back on this. Alex, what's the White House saying about these stories? Has the president weighed in yet about these workers that he has hired and is now laying off, even as he's calling for a border wall? He seems to be benefiting from undocumented immigration.
Well, Sarah Sanders was asked about this in her briefing on Monday and basically said that this is exactly why, she said she wouldn't comment on the Trump organization in general, but said this is exactly why President Trump has made these calls to, quote, fix the immigration system. And the president was actually interviewed by the Washington Post for a separate interview that they're doing, and said yesterday in an interview, he echoed Sarah Sanders, saying this is why we have to fix our immigration system. But the president and the White House are trying to separate him right now and what the activities that they're doing from the Trump organization, even though we really have been studying how the president has failed to separate himself from the Trump organization and even threatened Howard Schultz, notably on Monday, to take the Starbucks out of Trump Tower. But really, this is a story that gets to the heart of why President Trump has trouble with this immigration message, because he himself and his company has benefited from this system over the years. And we've seen story after story of Trump golf courses requesting the ability to get immigrants into their golf courses for low pay labor, and so this is something that kind of undercuts their entire argument.
And many of those workers, as we've been hearing, as they come forward now, have talked about presenting false papers to the Trump officials at those golf courses, although the golf clubs did not use the government system, which is called E-Verify, to check those documents, so that's sort of on them. In fact, a number of those workers have come here to Washington now, speaking out to lawmakers, calling for an investigation of the Trump administration's practices. We caught up with them a little bit earlier here in D.C. Here's a little bit of my interview with those former Trump golf club workers. What prompted you to speak out publicly?
The lawyer representing us, and we come to the Congress and to the Senate to ask for help, because we kind of we feel bad because we might get deported, but we come just for help.
Annabelle, you're representing so many workers from the Trump family properties who have been speaking out. You're in town today to seek protection from Congress. Tell us a little bit about your conversations with lawmakers and how what their reaction has been to the possibility that folks like Margarita here could potentially face deportation.
Sure. Well, they are absolutely concerned. They understand that indeed they are material witnesses of a federal crime, and any attempt to try to remove them from the United States could be considered obstruction of justice.
So to be clear, you're supporting an FBI investigation of the Trump family properties, even if it means exposing people like Gabrielle and Margarita and the hiring practices of the Trumps?
Well, they are witnesses of a federal crime. In the United States, even though you are undocumented, the law protects undocumented immigrants when they are victims of a crime.
Gabrielle, what is your thought, what is your feeling about the Trump family right now? Eric Trump yesterday said that he finds this situation to be heartbreaking.
I don't know why he feels like that, because after so long seeing us and like without like notice, without like go talk to us, just fire us like garbage. Why he feels like that?
Seems to be some hurt there, but Eric Trump giving an interview to the Washington Post overnight. We have some of Eric Trump's comments. He's overseeing the Trump Organization businesses, including some of those golf properties, telling the Washington Post that he is heartbroken by the situation. He's personally, of course, he says the employees are like family, but when presented with fake documents, the employer has little choice but to fire them. He says we're now instituting E-Verify on all of our properties as soon as possible. We're starting with the golf properties and going to be doing all of them. But Alex Mallon, you've been covering the Trump Organization since the beginning of the campaign, and you know better than anybody that this is something that President Trump actually publicly repeated during the campaign, that they were already doing this. He assured crowd after crowd that as he was calling for tighter immigration controls, his businesses already were adhering to the strictest standards.
Yeah, the president basically pointed to his companies as the model and said other companies should follow suit. And I think that when that story first broke in the in the New York Times of that undocumented worker who was literally scrubbing the president's toilets, was tending to his bedchambers at his Bedminster Golf Club, that was a stunning story. I think that the question was it stunning to the people in the Trump Organization? Was it stunning to the president? Did he have any knowledge that these undocumented workers were working for him and directly interacting with him? And that's something that we really have not been able to nail down at this point. And for instance, Eric Trump reacted again in another over Twitter and basically pointed to Amazon and said that they also don't have E-Verify. This is something that you can look up online to see which employers actually use the E-Verify system, and we always have. We basically know that the Trump Organization, their golf clubs, do not.
All right, Alex Mallon, thanks for that at the White House, for your reporting. Get inside, stay warm there. And Jordan, we should say that the Trump Organization did not respond to our request for comment on the reports, but it certainly does highlight some hypocrisy from the president, from his family, as they do push to require other employers to adhere to a stricter policy.
Absolutely. It's huge hypocrisy flag. But of course, this is, the challenge that the president undertook when he put his family in the middle of a presidential campaign. When you're going to go to the very top, you have to make sure that everything is crystal clean. And as we've seen with the Trump Organization, there are some places where they've cut some corners.
Sticking with the business headlines today, there's another major story popping out of Wisconsin that got a lot of heads turning this morning in Washington. Reuters News reporting that Foxconn, the tech giant that supplies a lot of parts to Apple and our iPhones, is reconsidering building a $10 billion facility in Wisconsin to make LCD panels. Of course, you see President Trump made with big fanfare, went to Wisconsin in 2017 to herald this factory as being the return of manufacturing jobs, 13,000 jobs, he said. But now that does seem to be perhaps in question, if you believe the reports. But let's bring in a Wisconsin reporter now who's been tracking the story, digging into what's actually going on today. Rich Kirchen is with the Milwaukee Business Journal. Rich, thanks so much for joining us by FaceTime. Great to see you. So you're an expert on this, also been trying to get to the bottom of what's going on here. Tell us what the latest is with respect to these jobs. Has the company indeed pulled a bait and switch? Are they backtracking?
No, they're not. As far they issued statements today, and they contacted the governor's office, Governor Evers, who took Scott Walker's place in this last election. They're saying they're still committed to the 13,000 jobs. What has changed is the nature of the jobs, and that's something they've been signaling since last summer. So a lot of what was in the Reuters story was already out there locally, again, going back probably 6 months, about the fact that the jobs we had, what the company was saying initially was that these were going to be more assembly, manufacturing type jobs. And it's really shifted to the majority of the jobs will be engineering, but they're still saying 13,000 jobs. The couple of new things that were in the Reuters story that we have not been able to verify was that by 2020, the company initially said they would have 5,000 employees, and the Reuters story said 1,000. The other thing is The company already has said they're not going to be doing the large format, large TV screens here. They've been saying they're still going to do small screens. The Reuters story says they're not going to be doing even the small TV screens here.
So a shift in type of job coming to Wisconsin, it sounds like, away from manufacturing, more to R&D. Also potentially, although you haven't verified it, Rich, a major slowdown in the pace of hiring, only 1,000 potentially, according to Reuters, by next year. And all of this was supposed to be in exchange for some pretty significant and controversial tax breaks and benefits in Wisconsin. How are Wisconsin officials responding to that news?
Well, the company gets upwards of $3 billion in tax breaks if they create 10,000 jobs plus, and then also spend about $10 billion on building their campus here in southeast Wisconsin. The company already fell short of their hiring goal the first year. They were eligible for $9 million in state tax credits. They're not getting those. They hired about 178 people last year. They were supposed to be at 240, I believe. But again, they're saying they're still going to do this. They're still going to invest all that money. It is over an extended period of time, 10 years or more. So jury's still out.
Jury's still out, but as you say, a significant investment in Wisconsin, $10 billion. But Rich Kirchen, as you know, Wisconsin factored quite significantly in the 2016 election, helped elect President Trump. The president eyeing Wisconsin again for his reelect as well. Do you think stories like this have any sort of a political impact on people's thinking, or do you think this sort of a thing is sort of seen as just business? The course of business, company changing their plans as they go?
Well, the Foxconn subsidies were an issue in the gubernatorial race, and Governor Walker, who was working, was leading that effort to bring Foxconn in and give them the money. He lost by a slim margin to Democrat Tony Evers. So it wasn't the top issue, but it was an issue. And Wisconsin's a swing state. Tony Evers beat Scott Walker by about the same number of votes as Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Very competitive there, indeed. Rich Kirchen, thank you so much for joining us. Senior reporter, Milwaukee Business Journal, getting to the bottom of that Foxconn story that was trending on Twitter earlier today. A big one. Rich, thanks so much for that. And Jordan, you know better than anybody covering the White House that the White House is closely following these business stories, that they have put a lot of capital in. The Carrier story out of Indiana, the plant that the president saved, U.S. steel factories that the president was saving, now Foxconn. Do you get the sense that they get nervous by seeing some of the rollbacks or supposed rollbacks?
Devin, if they're nervous, they're not talking about it, and that's how you kind of know if the Trump administration might be nervous about something, because they go radio silent. And in this case, in Foxconn, it's hard to overstate just how much the president has played up this particular company. He's made multiple trips to Wisconsin. I was actually with him for that groundbreaking ceremony. So this is not good news. This is not a storyline that fits the president's narrative. So we'll see what response they have. But Devin, the president has talked up Foxconn just so much. So certainly not welcome news.
We'll see if he dials that back. Thanks for that, Jordan. Meanwhile, the president has his eyes on a major foreign story that we've been talking about here in the briefing room down in Venezuela. Of course, those major developments as opposition party continues to turn to the streets with hundreds of thousands of everyday Venezuelans protesting for the ouster of Nicolas Maduro, the president there. They're demanding free elections. They were out in force again today, another walkout. This on the heels of a phone call between President Trump and the opposition leader Juan Guaido, the 35-year-old National Assembly president. Significant now that he has spoken to President Trump for the first time, and our Corey Waddell is down there in Caracas, Venezuela. He was at the protest today. Corey, so I'm sorry, Cody, tell me the latest from those protests. How was the scene like today there?
Well, it was interesting. Hundreds of people came out at dozens of spots. Thousands surely here in Caracas came out just sort of as a walkout, as you said. They left their jobs, they left their homes, and they protested on the sidewalks. And in some cases, they closed streets. And they were holding these signs showing why they think the military should switch its support from Maduro to Guaido. They say Guaido is the legitimate president here. Interesting as well that the opposition did not mobilize towards the city center today, perhaps a signal that there is a back channel between the opposition and the government as this standoff here continues.
Hey, Cody, we did hear from Maduro today. He did make some comments publicly saying he's open to talking with the opposition. That's garnered President Trump's attention. He put some spotlight on that on Twitter as well, suggesting his influence could be moving Maduro to the exits. What do you give the odds of some conversations or even negotiations between President Maduro and Guaido?
Well, Guaido and the opposition has been clear that the only thing they are willing to negotiate would be the exit of Nicolás Maduro. We've seen Nicolás Maduro in past confrontations when things get tense here. He will use that chip of negotiations to de-escalate the situation, and we've seen that situation happen several times already. So I think the opposition is only willing to negotiate if it's for the ouster of Maduro.
And Cody, before we let you go, I'm just curious about the impact that the involvement of the United States is or is not having there on the ground with people in the streets, as we're seeing some pictures of Guaido protesting today with some of those folks. When you are out talking to people, as you're out looking at the signage, is there a sense on the ground there among the opposition protesters that Donald Trump is with them, that the United States is with them? Is that something that's talked about there?
Absolutely. Here in the opposition circles, at least, they were disappointed by the Obama administration. They want harsh sanctions on Maduro. They want harsh moves against Maduro, and they're very pleased, at least the opposition folks, with Donald Trump's harsh sanctions and harsh moves against Maduro. Although polls do show here that a slight majority of Venezuelans would oppose any type of military intervention in the country. And of course, we know that Trump has said on multiple occasions that all options are on the table here.
They have been saying that. We have an eye on the developments over at the Pentagon as well. Cody Weddle, thank you so much for your reporting. It's been terrific having you this week in the briefing room. Thanks so much. And Jordan, what's interesting is that the Twitter effect here is quite significant in this story because of the communications lockdown in Caracas and some of the other cities in Venezuela. Most of the opposition people are able to track statements from President Trump and others on Twitter only. And so they are actually listening to what's being tweeted.
Yeah, it's having that global democratization effect, if you will.
Like we saw in the Middle East just a few years ago. In fact, you can follow us on Twitter as well, at Jordan Phelps, at Devin Dwyer. Hope you can track all of our reporting. Download the app as well, ABC News app. A good way to follow all the stories we've talked about today. We'll be right back here tomorrow, 3:30 Eastern Time in the briefing room. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.